Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Headlines. And in this programme tonight we'll be discussing the precarious security situation that Israel is currently facing. Israel hasn't been in this situation since prior to the Six-Day War in June 1967, as Israel faces the prospect of war on multiple fronts, with Hezbollah and Iran posed to strike Israel from Lebanon and Syria, the prospect of Israel facing Hamas's rockets and missiles from Hamas, and even possibly a third Palestinian intifada in Judea, in Samaria, and also the new equation of Israel having to confront drones as well as missiles means that Israel is in a very dangerous situation. So we'll be asking in this programme how Israel will respond to such a threat. Robin, thank you so much for being my co-host on Behind the Headlines as we unpack Israel's dangerous security situation. Firstly, what are your thoughts on the prospect that Israel is facing a multi-front war?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to stand in for Reagan while he's away. It's interesting because back in early April this year, Professor Mordecai Kedar, that you know both of us know him, published an article that went viral across many different English language platforms, basically sounding a very strong warning that Israel potentially could face a multi-front conflict in the not too distant future. And I think it probably raised the temperature as far as people getting concerned about what potentially might happen. And it's interesting, here we are, May, June, 2-3 months later, and almost everybody's talking about this, whether it's Israeli politicians, whether it's Israeli senior military and intelligence staff. It's like all of a sudden Israel has woken up. It's woken out of a slumber and realized that actually, as one former IDF general says, Iran is everywhere. And Iran has it's like an octopus with its tentacles into so many of these Islamic terror groups. It doesn't necessarily fully control them, but it's certainly equipping them, whether it's financially with weapons and all, and training. And it's actually directing some of them in potentially getting ready for this multi-front assault on Israel.
Absolutely, and of course we saw the latest barrage of rockets and missiles fired by Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad back in April. We saw again tension on the Temple Mount during Ramadan, but this is something different, isn't it? This is something that Israel hasn't really experienced this until prior to the Six-Day War, and as we're recording this program today, is actually, I think, is it the 54th anniversary? Yes, it would be 54th anniversary of that famous war in June 1967. We all now look back and remember the famous victory in 6 days, but in May of 1967, the situation was very precarious and very dangerous. That Israel faced the prospect of a war on three fronts: on the Jordanian front, in the south with Egypt, and then also in the north with Syria. But today that situation has become just as dangerous, as if not more dangerous. The prospect of Hezbollah having 160,000 rockets and missiles fired at Israel. Something like 90,000 Iranian forces and militias, only probably 50 miles away from Israel's Golan Heights in Syria. And with the prospect of that war coming to an end ties up a lot of these Hezbollah terrorists that have been involved, either fighting in Syria in the civil war, propping up Assad's regime, or fighting for Iranian interests in Yemen, means that they will then have a free hand to go back to Lebanon. We have the prospect of Hamas, also puppets of the Iranian regime, firing rockets and missiles into Israel at the same time. The prospect of a third intifada. And also the drone warfare that Israel hasn't seen in any kind of major military confrontation being deployed for the first time, even as far afield as Yemen or Iraq as well, which does present a very, very grave picture and a dangerous picture that Israel's facing.
Yeah, I think it was this same general, Avivi, he's retired now, but he used an interesting expression in one of the talks that he gave at a recent security conference, is that the IDF can no longer content itself with luxurious conflicts. And what he meant by that was one-offs. In other words, Israel is concentrating either on Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in one place, or it's Lebanon in another place. He's making the point that the IDF for so long, since 67 and since 73, has had this luxury. But now that is completely swept away, and as we're talking about today, this whole concept of facing multi-front attacks from all of these different groups, proxies of the Iranian regime. But the factor that has really changed, as you've already highlighted, is this whole business of drones and unmanned aerial vehicles, some of them which are precision guided. This is certainly what Hezbollah has at its disposal, and it seems Iran is trying to make that available to Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza as well. And of course, they've already got them with their own militias in Syria. This is a whole new ballgame. I've read some reports that say when this kicks off, Israel has enough Iron Dome response batteries to cope with 2 to 3 days of continuous onslaught. After that, they run out. After that, the only thing that is left is either the Israeli Air Force or just anti-aircraft fire. Or if Israel has actually finished this laser dome, this laser technology, and is keeping that secret, and that may be rolled out, or maybe rolled out anyway because they'll be in such desperate measures. But this is something that Israel has never faced before on this basis. They've been used to tanks, they've been used to aircraft, they've been used to artillery shelling. They have never been used to these kamikaze type drone attacks and those that are precision guided by computer systems. This is a whole new ballgame.
No, absolutely. We know that Israel has the best air defense system in the world, and even this is a huge challenge facing the Jewish state.
Every time one of those rockets goes off from Iron Dome, it's at least $50,000 or more. Whereas these missiles that are coming from Hamas, from Hezbollah, are maybe a few $1,000s. Now, obviously, the fact that Israel is able to intercept these is saving it lives. It is saving it tens of millions of shekels worth of damage. But the supply is limited. And they're dependent very much on the US manufacturing end to resupply. And everybody has been saying this is so slow. There is such a backlog of orders from the US military to resupply what they already lost in that recent conflict. So, it's a very precarious situation.
And also the backdrop of the Iranian regime edging ever closer to nuclear weapons as well. Yeah. And the prospect of, which looks very unlikely, that Israel will get the green light from the United States to carry out airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. And if Israel does carry out a strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, then what we're discussing tonight is most likely the Iranian response. Mm-hmm. But the question is, will the Iranians wait to be attacked first, or will they attack first rather than waiting for the Israelis? And it is my guess, knowing what the Iranians are like, they will strike first. Because this will tie down Israeli security forces. This will tie down the Israeli Air Force, and they won't be able to have the ability then to take on Iran's nuclear facilities as well. So this is a very precarious situation. So it was also a very interesting article that was published by James Rothwell, writing for the Sunday Telegraph on the 28th of May 2023, entitled "Inside Israel's Plan to Defend Itself from Attack by Iran." He says that Israel prepares for a multi-front war which could see hundreds of missiles and drones launched from Gaza, Lebanon, Syria and even Iraq. He says on the 6th of April 2023, Israel marked a watershed moment when 33 rockets were launched from Lebanon, but thankfully intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. This was the single biggest rocket barrage from Lebanon in nearly 2 decades, invoking memories of the Second Lebanon War in 2006. He says that Israel faces the prospect of war again, but on this time an unprecedented in scale and could be just weeks away. He said, amidst the urge in violence in the Holy Land, Israeli officials are preparing for a multi-front war which could see hundreds, if not thousands, of missiles, drones launched per day from Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, potentially even Iraq, where Tehran's backed terror group has threatened to join the fray. Northern Israel could bear the brunt of that conflict, as Palestinian militants and the Iranian proxy group Hezbollah in southern Lebanon have estimated have to have in the region of 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at Israel. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN news report in which the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is saying that he can meet any danger from any foe.
In his effort to bolster security and confidence, Netanyahu reinstated Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, whom he fired when Gallant publicly opposed the ruling coalition's judicial reforms.
There were disagreements between us, even severe disagreements on some issues, but I decided to leave the disagreements behind us. Gallant remains in his position, and we will continue to work together for the security of the citizens of Israel.
Within the past week, more than 30 rockets were fired from Lebanon into northern Israel and at least 6 from Syria. After the rocket attacks from the north and south, Israel hit targets inside the Gaza Strip, Lebanon, and Syria. Following those rocket attacks on several fronts, Netanyahu emphasized Israel is pushing back.
I can't tell you everything we do, but we do a lot. In Syria, we acted against Iranian targets and against targets of the Syrian regime. The Assad regime already knows the price that he paid is only the beginning.
Iran is essentially trying to put a noose around Israel's neck. You can add the Houthis in Yemen to that list as well. They want to surround Israel with a noose and squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. And, we're not going to go gently into that good night.
Former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. and now Strategic Affairs Minister for the Netanyahu government tells CBN News Iran's fingerprints are all over these regional threats.
We're going to stand and defend ourselves against Iran and its proxies. And that's what we did a couple days ago. And the Prime Minister said that the response was going to be serious. And I don't think the response just ended. I think it's a constant effort to make sure that Iran does not entrench itself in Syria, that Iran is not building sophisticated weaponry in Lebanon, and that we are fighting all the time against Iran and its proxies.
In an apparent move toward Iran's meddling, the U.S. Navy is deploying a guided missile submarine capable of carrying up to 154 Tomahawk missiles to the region. It released pictures of the submarine crossing the Suez Canal on Friday. Israel is also reeling from terror attacks inside its border. This ramming attack on the Tel Aviv promenade wounded several and killed this 35-year-old lawyer from Italy. Family and friends mourned 2 sisters after a Palestinian terrorist murdered them in a shooting attack on Friday in the northern Jordan Valley. Their mother, also shot in the attack, died Monday. The flashpoint came last Tuesday night when Muslim men barricaded themselves in the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount. Israel police negotiated with them to leave, but they refused. When the police entered the mosque, the men set off fireworks and threw stones in retaliation, and videos spread throughout the Muslim world, providing the pretext to attack Israel. Opposition leader Yair Lapid says after attending a security briefing Sunday with Netanyahu, he left more worried than he went in. Lapid has also played a role in protest against the judicial reform proposals.
Do you see that Israel's enemies are getting closer? And do you also feel that maybe they sense some weakness in Israel because of all the demonstrations that have literally gone for several months?
They're dead wrong. Israel has a citizens' army, and Israel, you can count on the people of Israel that they're going to put these disagreements aside, and when they are threatened, when the lives of their families are threatened, we're not fighting wars thousands of miles away in foreign countries. We're fighting to protect our homeland, to protect our families.
Also, Sky News is reporting that in an about-face, the White House will invite Prime Minister Netanyahu to Washington by the end of April. Earlier, President Joe Biden said he didn't expect Netanyahu to come to the White House anytime soon, in an apparent signal that the U.S. is upset over the Israeli government's attempt at judicial reform. At his press conference, Netanyahu said friends can disagree.
The U.S. is our indispensable ally. It hasn't changed. My view of it hasn't changed. Again, it doesn't mean that as a sovereign state, Israel and the Prime Minister of Israel can't say this short word on occasion to the United States. It's called no. Sometimes there's a 3-letter word. It's called yes. But you have to have the freedom to do both, and I do. I keep that freedom, and I think it's important.
That's the response that Israel is saying to Iran, and that CBN news report was recorded around Passover Easter time back in April, but still kind of very relevant to today's topic of discussion. Robin, also what I think has changed really is the dramatic change in alliances that have occurred in the Middle East over recent months. Predominantly the Iranian Saudi reconciliation pact signed by those two once sworn enemies under the sponsorship of the Communist Party of China, the Chinese government, which has effectively seen an end to two warring conflicts in the Middle East, Yemen and also in Syria, which means that Iran's elite forces, pretty much the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and its main terrorist proxy, Hezbollah, are no longer to be tied up in conflicts on taking on board the against the Sunnis in Yemen, and also propping up Assad's regime, will be given a free hand to go back to Lebanon, battle harden, and then pose a kind of bigger threat to Israel. We don't see that the Saudis are then pushing back on Iranian influence on the Middle East. And the other damaging aspect of this one is the complete absence of the United States in the Middle East to provide any security guarantees either to the Israelis or to the Saudis or to the Egyptians or the Jordanians, which is then pushing these Sunni nations into Iran's camp, in which the whole purpose of setting up the Abraham Accords was to have an Israeli-Sunni coalition to push back Iranian expansionism and dominance in the region.
Yeah, I mean, it is such a strange turn of events because normally the Shia and the Sunnis are at each other's throats. They almost hate each other more than they hate Israel and the West and the United States. But I think it speaks to the measure of lack of confidence that many of the Gulf and the Middle Eastern states have in America under the present Biden administration to actually be more than just a paper tiger, which it seems it has become in the thinking of many of the leaders of these nations. And so you have this realignment. You have, as you pointed out, through China's offices, Saudi Arabia effectively burying the hatchet with Iran. In fact, today, as we were recording this program, the Iranian embassy is reopening in Saudi Arabia after being closed for years. And it's that in itself may seem, in our view, an insignificant thing, but it's not. It's a major thing because these two have been literally at each other's throats for all of this time. And so we have ripple effects of a lack of leadership, of a lack of clarity, a lack of backbone on the part of the current American administration. It is seen as weak. It is seen as not trustworthy. And of course, Israel itself has had to face the fact that America has been withdrawing tons and tons of munitions that have been stored in Israel and carting them off to the Ukrainian conflict to support the Ukrainians. So that too leaves Israel with a large hole in its munition supply. All of these are small steps, but when you put them all together, they show a situation where the United States is no longer trusted. It's no longer a trusted ally. For all of the hot air that's coming out of the Biden administration to the country, people on the ground don't trust it anymore. And so they're making rearrangement in order to protect themselves, which is what any nation with any sense is going to do in the situation that these nations find themselves in.
No, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. And let's hear if this is what IDF spokesman, Lieutenant Colonel Hetch, has mentioned. I met him back in December at the Christian Media Conference, a Jewish guy from Glasgow. So it's great to know that a Glaswegian is now the official spokesman for the IDF in Israel. He's a great guy. He says, according to a recent briefing to international journalists by IDF spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Richard Het says Israeli air defences are braced for an all-out assault led by Iran. He explains that long-range rockets fired from Lebanon or Gaza could hit Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and might even travel as far south as Israel's tourist resort of Eilat in the south. He says, when we look at a full-scale campaign, it'll be the little event in Gaza, then the big event in the north of Israel, which will predominantly Iran. He also then said, for example, previous attacks on Israel have followed well-established patterns, with Hamas in the Gaza Strip firing rockets and missiles at Israeli cities, which in turn prompts several rounds of airstrikes by Israel before eventual ceasefire. He says the big issue here is because they probably can't beat us on the conventional battlefield, their efforts will be a quantity of rockets, projectiles, and the story will be precision. He says, as we advance our air defense, our enemies are also part of that race. They are investing in precision. They are investing a lot in being able to saturate our system. Says while much of the violence in Israel and Judea and Samaria this year has been around ground bases, air defense is increasingly a priority as the threats could come from unexpected places. I mean, he's also now talking about the prospect not only of Israel, but also the Western world for the first time since the Second World War of actually losing air superiority in the air. And that's how Israel was able to win so successfully the Six-Day War in June 1967 because of the amazing work being carried out by the Israeli Air Force to take out the Egyptian, Jordanian, Syrian and also Iraqi Air Force in one day to give them air superiority. And we saw that Israel had to do that in the 73 Yom Kippur War, but now with the inset of drones and drone warfare, Israel may lose that air superiority, which is very, very, very dangerous situation that the Jewish state finds itself in.
Yeah, and we're back again to what we were talking about earlier, to this ability of all of these Iranian-backed and supplied terror proxies being able to saturate Israel's airspace with literally hundreds, if not thousands, of rockets. And certainly as far as Hezbollah is concerned in Lebanon, to be able to sustain that for many days. But something I think probably needs to be added into the equation is the fact that last week, the Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, publicly acknowledged that something that Israel has known for over a year, in that Iran is modifying oil tankers and merchant ships and disguising them as platforms to launch these unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, kamikaze drones. So, it doesn't even have to be an Iranian flagship. If it's a ship that is connected to Iran, it can be anywhere literally in the world and potentially be carrying armaments. I mean, that puts anywhere, the west coast of the States, Europe, anywhere in the Mediterranean, anywhere in the Indian Pacific, anywhere that an Iranian ship can go, there is the potential for them unleashing these rocket attacks. So that too is part of the dynamic of what's changing in warfare in the Middle East.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN news item. This one is called Iran nears red line with a new missile, builds a nuclear bunker, endangers new escalation of this conflict. And this is a very current news report. Over to CBN.
The Khaybar missile, named after an ancient Jewish fortress conquered by Muslims, is capable of reaching Israel. Iranian defense officials say it can penetrate enemy air defense systems and evade radar detection. To the west, it's considered a dangerous move that can't be ignored.
Despite the restrictions on Iran's missile-related activities under UN Security Council Resolution 2231, Iran continues to seek a range of missile technologies from foreign suppliers and to conduct ballistic missile tests in defiance of the resolution.
Meanwhile, Israeli defense forces keep close watch on all areas of Iran's nuclear development. A top general recently stating that Israel could soon be left with no choice other than a preemptive attack.
Iran knows it's playing with fire, and they are getting close to what both Israel and the United States are basically messaging is their red line of where they won't allow Iran's nuclear program to go any further.
In what appears to be an effort to gain the upper hand against the West, Iran is reportedly building a nuclear facility deep underground. While it's unclear whether U.S. bombs could reach it, the Air Force recently posted a picture of this bomb designed for such a purpose, adding it's time to test its performance.
Just how far each weapon goes and just how far in the mountain Iran is digging are going to be closely held secrets by both nations. They don't want to give the other country the upper hand and give them the ability to know whether their strike could work or not.
Gabriel Nerona, former State Department special advisor for Iran, says although diplomacy is not completely off the table, at this point it doesn't seem to be headed anywhere. He says to truly sway Tehran, the Biden administration must threaten consequences the Islamic regime won't risk.
The United States now is starting to get more serious about those messages, and I think that picture of bunker buster bombs is part of that strategy, and we need to see a lot more of that rhetoric and seriousness coming from both the Biden administration as well as Congress.
Nerona says it would be a mistake to underestimate the regime.
The country that chants death to Israel and death to the United States should be taken seriously. I think one of the mistakes that we've made throughout history is not believing dictators when they make a promise in public.
According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran is already enriching uranium to near weapons-grade levels. But the country has yet to announce that it's built a nuclear weapon. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
And we see that the security situation facing the world, and particularly Israel and the Middle East, is becoming more precarious day by day, as Iran gets closer and closer to the nuclear weapon. And once tests a nuclear bomb, then there's no way back. So we know the regime is very close to nuclear breakout. And of course, this just adds to the tension, doesn't it, Robin?
It does. I mean, the thing that sometimes puzzles me with these reports, I'm not talking about CBN as such, but even the commentary that comes from Israel's military and political leaders, is the concern that Iran gets to 90% enrichment. When the two bombs that were dropped on Japan back in 1945 were something like 60% enrichment, and we saw the damage that they did. So why this 90 now has become this magical figure, I don't understand, because Iran is way past the 60%. And the fact that it's 5, 6, 7% off this 90%, I think, is irrelevant. Iran has already passed the threshold. We keep seeing reports, we keep hearing reports that Iran has enough nuclear material to make at least 5 bombs. One anyway, but at least 5, that's the latest, and it's counting. So I think what that should say to us is that heads are coming together, certainly in the Iran command in Israel, on how to attempt to stop this process going any further. And as you said earlier in the program, if Israel does go down that route, she probably will do it without any reference to the United States, because the United States can't be trusted to keep the secret.
Exactly.
And it'll do it probably with the knowledge that no one else will back her.
Yep.
We will sit back and let Israel do our dirty work for us, yet again, surprise, surprise, but then Israel and the rest of the Middle East will have to live with the consequences of what literally blows up out of that situation.
Exactly, and this is why the Israelis, I think, are very, very concerned and very reluctant not to take action. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, and that Benjamin Netanyahu had a wonderful opportunity when Trump was president. We know that the Trump administration effectively gave Israel a green light. Hezbollah were running out of money. The Iranian regime was on the verge of kind of a political and economic collapse because the sanctions were working, and peace and stability were about to break out in the Middle East. It seems like a completely different world away, even though it was only 3 years ago. The changes have happened so quickly and so fast, add to this growing danger and tension. And of course, what we're talking about in today's program, the prospect of Israel facing a multi-front war, would certainly happen if Israel carries out attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities, or worse, they could happen before, as the Iranians would want to get the Israeli forces bogged down dealing with threats on its border to allow the Iranian regime time to actually get up to that 90% weapons grade material and actually have nuclear breakout. But I was told by a security expert years ago that it's only when a nation tests a bomb do you know that they have the bomb. At the moment, the Iranians haven't tested it. So we know that they are not quite there yet in terms of.
So it's a veiled threat, in other words. Yes.
And once they test it, there's no going back.
Yes. Okay.
But also the danger is as well, not only Iran's nuclear weapons program, but its ballistic missiles program, as we saw with that new missile.
And the fact that, I think it was yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, the Iranian regime announced that it has developed a supersonic missile. Now, whether that's bluff or bravado, we have no way of knowing. I mean, on the basis of what Iran has said in the past, I don't think it is. But so that again, you know, a Mach 3 speed missile, which can evade just about any defense system that you can think of, again, is a game changer, even on just the ballistic level, never mind the nuclear level.
Absolutely.
And as a previous Iranian president said, when it comes to bombing Israel with an atomic weapon, it only takes one bomb.
Yeah, that was
that's it.
But also, the other thing, I think there's a lot of bravado, huge amounts of bravado with the Iranian regime as well. The fact is that they want to carry out this war against Israel using their terrorist proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, away from Iran's borders, indicates that Iran is no match for Israel. And that if Israel did decide to take on Iran in a kind of military confrontation, there is no way that Iran has the military technology, the know-how, or the ability to defeat Israel in a conventional war, and that's why they're using unconventional war. But the new area of attack that Israel now has to worry about is Iraq. According to the same article in the Sunday Telegraph, they said that the height of tensions during Ramadan in April, the Iran-backed Iraqi militia group, if I pronounce this right, Al-Jababa, released an unusual video threatening drone strikes in Israel, stressing that our souls are deeply connected to Jerusalem. The Iranian-backed forces in Syria also launched their own missile assault in April on the Golan Heights in response to the police raid on the Temple Mount. It says, according to the Jerusalem Post, Al-Najaba is an Iranian-backed terror militia, and other pro-Iranian Shiite militias are part of Iran's network forces in the region. The Iraqi-based militias have threatened Israel in the past, and an Iraqi leader, Asib al-Hab al-Harik group, visited Lebanon in 2017 and also threatened Israel as well. So this is a new theatre of war that Israel could face actually from Iraq.
And I mean, again, that tells us how unstable Iraq has been, and it gives us an indicator yet again of the insidious influence that Iran has in this broken nation. That these groups are now strong enough, volatile enough to, come up front and be willing to threaten Israel from within the border of Iraq.
Absolutely, which is very, very precarious. But also there's a plan that I found on the website belonging to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. It's also on the IDF's website as well when you click on Hezbollah. And the title of the article is Hezbollah Preparing for an All-Out War with Israel. So according to the Jerusalem Institute for Public Affairs, is Hezbollah preparing for an all-out war with Israel? Hezbollah on the 23rd of April, on the 23rd anniversary of Israel's withdrawal from southern Lebanon, demonstrated to journalists their operation plan to destroy a defensive wall built by Israel on the borders between Israel and Lebanon. And the idea is to breach the wall that would enable Hezbollah elite units to storm Israeli villages and conquer parts of the Galilee. The Hezbollah operational plan of invading northern Israel is nothing new, according to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. It was first emerged on February the 16th, 2011, when its leader Nasrallah told its terrorists to prepare to conquer the Galilee should Israel launch a war against them. The plan is 5 Hezbollah brigades would take an area north of Israel, and these are the areas. Brigade 1 will take over a town in Nahariya that directly borders Lebanon, or part of it. Brigade 2 will take over the town of Shlomo. Brigade 3 will reach the town of Carmel and conquer areas south of it. Brigade 4 would take over communities of Makaya, Ramot, Naphtali, and Yeftah. And Brigade 5 will serve as strategic reserve force for special missions. But the plan was postponed after the outbreak of the civil war in Syria, in which Hezbollah forces had to defend and prop up Assad's regime against Sunni rebels. So, I mean, this is something, a kind of frightening scenario of having Hezbollah elite forces break into northern Israel and cause as much mayhem and damage, as well as taking as many hostages as they can. This is something that the Israeli civilians will be very, very concerned about, and also the IDF extremely worried about.
Yes, and of course we've seen it recently, Hezbollah inviting international journalists on their side of the Lebanese-Israeli border for their military exercises, their military maneuvers. And they may seem to us to be comical in one sense, because they're done on motorbikes, they're done on four-wheel, what do you call the four-wheelers, scooters? I can't remember.
Quad bikes.
Quad bikes.
Yeah.
But this is part of the strategy. This is part. You overwhelm Israel in the first day or the first stage with aerial munitions, and then you send these guys into an Israel that is sort of trying to gather itself and recover from the destruction from the aerial munitions. And then you send these guys through the border. They break through the border and they fan out to fulfill these 4 or 5 agendas that Hezbollah has already set in motion. So again, the concern obviously is that those who live in the northern part of Israel face probably the worst of the initial onslaught. And I remember when I lived and worked in Israel, I mean, this is 5-6 years ago, the IDF said that in the next conflict with Hezbollah, they would be moving people from up to 25 miles near to the Lebanese border away from the border, so that there are no Israeli citizens anywhere near the border, and that would give the IDF complete control of the area and let them just go in and do what needed to be done, and there'd be no Israeli casualties caught in the crossfire.
And that would be very,
so this is part of the IDF's planning, and I doubt if that has changed.
No, I wouldn't have thought that would have changed, and it also shows that this will be extremely bloody as well.
It will. It will be terrible.
And the fact that as well that Hezbollah have somewhere in the region of 150 to 160,000 rockets, if not more, targeted Israel. But also we have this new impact of the Iranians deploying military drones for the first time as well, and that Israel will face its first drone warfare attack from Iranians. And of course we know the damage being done by the Iranian-supplied military drones to Russian forces to attack cities in Ukraine, such as Kiev, to know their kind of devastation, and it's all about gaining air superiority. So, so quickly on this one. So, according to the same Sunday Telegraph article, Israel is concerned about the prospect of Iranian-made drones against them, as Tehran continues to ship them to Russian forces to use on Ukrainian cities. In return, Moscow is providing Tehran with advanced Su-35 fighter planes that could be used to attack Israel. So this is a scenario that Israel could face, pretty much dealing with the drones and stuff as well. And we see also that recently this year, back in January, I think, it's believed that Israel carried out a military operation against a factory in Isfahan in Iran that's actually producing these military drones that are being used by Russia in its war against Ukraine, but also could then be deployed against Israel by Hezbollah or Iranian forces actually operating in Syria.
Yeah, we have a situation where the Iranians are learning off the Russians and the Russians are learning off the Iranians. It's a two-way street. And you've got the North Koreans, and you've got the Chinese in the background as well. You've got a real access of evil, as someone has called it again. And worldwide terrorism in the hands of all of these entities. But Israel needs to be keeping a close eye on particularly what Iran and Russia are doing, because there's a perfecting of the drone technology going on in that conflict, which you can be sure of that Iran will then bring to bear in the supplies to its proxies that are bordering around Israel.
Which is a kind of a frightening prospect. But I think in this war will be like no other war that Israel has been in. I mean, Israel has warned before that any homes that are sheltering these rocket launchers in southern Lebanon will be a military target. And so essentially we could see Israel actually deploy a lot of firepower on civilian areas in order to protect Israel from probably the worst war that Israel has faced in the history over the past 75 years.
We face a situation where the Jewish community in this nation and other nations and the Christian community who are supportive of Israel are going to have to be prepared to step up to the plate and be prepared to stand with Israel no matter what happens if and when this conflict breaks out, because the world press is going to go to town and paint Israel for the most part as the aggressor and the one who's causing all the destruction. And it's going to be a very difficult time for Israel and the Jewish communities outside of Israel.
No, absolutely, and we could see a huge escalation in Jew hatred as well. So let's go to this excellent CBN news report looking at the prospect of Israel facing a drone attack. Over to you, CBN.
This mission from March 2021 didn't make headlines or the nightly news, but it made history. 2 Israeli F-35 jet squadrons scrambled to intercept 2 Iranian drones heading for Israel.
This is a historic milestone for the Israeli Air Force that is a leader in the world and carried out the first UAV interception with an F-35 aircraft.
Historic and yet crucial for Israel's future survival. Dubbed 2 bridges, it marks the first use of the F-35s in this way.
Defending the skies of Israel is the first mission every pilot learns to carry out. And this was exactly the mission we took off for. We carried out an interception of 2 Iranian aircrafts that were aimed to infiltrate the state of Israel and to carry out hostile activities in Israeli territory.
The Shahad 197 drones have a wingspan of 22 feet and can fly more than 1,200 miles. That provides the ability to reach Israel and return to Iran. Iran has employed and increased this form of terrorism for several years by using the drones to collect intelligence, deliver munitions and supplies, while also launching attacks. According to an IDF intelligence officer, Iran is equipping and training its proxies, such as Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis in Yemen, with these weapons. Seth Frantzman, author of Drone Wars, says there's more.
It means you have very skilled operators who can use drones to target ships or energy facilities or whatever they want.
It utilizes hundreds of these drones to target sites around the Middle East, like the high-profile attack on the Aramco oil processing facility in Saudi Arabia.
It shows us exactly what can be done with drones, even against an advanced power like Saudi Arabia that ostensibly has Western air defenses, and the drones were able to come in quite low and I think avoid radars, and were able to carry out pinpoint attacks.
And last summer's attack against the Israeli tanker Mercer Street. During last year's war between Israel and Hamas, Iran launched a drone from Iraq that was downed over the Jordan Valley. 4 years ago, Iran launched a UAV from Syria, reportedly carrying explosives intended for delivery to terror groups in Judea and Samaria. A combat helicopter intercepted it inside northern Israel. As part of the negotiations for the Iran nuclear deal, a major concern is that sanctions will be lifted and the regime could funnel more money to its proxies. That, along with the specter of a nuclear Iran, would threaten global security. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Israel's Ministry of Defense, Tel Aviv.
And the special guest we have for this program tonight is Israeli Messianic leader as well as IDF reservist, Stefan Silva, joining us from the north of Israel. Stefan, as a reservist in the IDF and someone who's fought bravely in the Second Lebanon War in 2006. Just outline the dangerous and precarious situation that Israel is facing today with the prospect of fighting on multiple fronts, including in northern Israel against Lebanon and Syria, as well as against Hamas in Gaza, and even put into the mix a Palestinian third intifada, as well as drones attacking Israel from possibly Yemen or even Iraq. What are your thoughts on the very dangerous situation that Israel finds itself in today?
Yeah, so that is the situation. The IDF is currently conducting a very large exercise or drill called Egrof HaMachatz, firm hand, I believe it's translated in English. It's a 2-week-long drill beginning from last week and ending in a couple of days at the end of this week. Basically simulating that type of multi-front war involving the Air Force, the Navy, the Army. As a part of my reserve duty, I was called up to go for a few days at the beginning of last week and was up there for that. And that is definitely what's on the horizon. It's what we see happening. We have Iran sitting several hundred kilometers to the east of us. They have their tentacles going into Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. They have their tentacles going into Hamas, Hezbollah, southern Lebanon, Hamas down in Gaza. They have their tentacles now attempting to set up some kind of a front on the Israel's northern border with on the Golan Heights as well, a border that has always been very quiet. I served there back in 2005. I had an entire sector that I was commanding at the time, and it had been considered a very, very quiet border for decades, I think, since 73. But then several years after I finished my military service, ISIS, there was a period where they were right on the border, and that kind of raised the level of alert there. But now again, it's very high because of Iran's attempt, along with Hezbollah, to establish another front against Israel and against the IDF from that region within Syria under Bashar al-Assad's sovereignty. And then beyond that, like you said, we also have these potential cells within the Palestinian population throughout Judea and Samaria, even within the Israeli Arab population within Israel. These guys would be Israeli citizens. They would have Israeli IDs and passports, be free to go and come as they wish. And there have been attempts of Iran, from Iran's side, to recruit such people to serve, obviously, as proxies of them from within Israel, or even from within Israel itself, or if not from within Judea and Samaria, which obviously has easier access into Israel than, let's say, from Lebanon, Gaza, or from Syria. So we definitely see Iran trying to connect all of these sectors and all of these regions together. If in the past these were isolated events, what took place in Gaza didn't affect the Judea and Samaria. What happened in Judea and Samaria didn't affect what happened in southern Lebanon or within Israel, then now we're seeing an attempt to interlock and to intertwine these various sectors together so that what happens in one affects the other. And when one flares up, then it causes a flaring up of these other sectors as well. And as I think it's very evident and clear, then that is from our enemy's perspective of trying to create a multi-front attack against Israel that will happen simultaneously from three of Israel's borders: Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, but then also from Judea and Samaria, but even from within Israel itself, potentially.
And Stefan, how has Israel got itself into this very precarious security situation? And are we seeing a change of shifting alliances in the region to blame for this, namely the normalization of relations between the Islamic Republic and Iran under Chinese sponsorship, with the war in both Yemen and also Syria look like they're coming to an end, which means it frees up Hezbollah fighters to concentrate their focus on Israel and attacking Israel?
Yeah, so like you said, there are the pieces on the chessboard are moving. Obviously, America, the U.S. Influence within the region has declined severely in the past couple of years since the end of the Trump administration. Even during the Trump administration, the American influence has been less felt in countries like Lebanon, Syria, and other such nations, with everything that took place with ISIS during those years. So over a period of a number of years, there's been a decline in the American influence in the entire region. But like I said, even more so since the end of the Trump administration. And now, like you mentioned, we see China coming in and brokering peace or the renewal of relations between Syria, Bashar al-Assad, and Saudi Arabia and Iran, who up until a couple of years ago, it looked like they were keeping very, very clear distance, possibly even on the verge of war with these nations, and being a lot more close to the West, to Israel, to America, but potentially also normalizing relations with Israel, something that still may happen in the future. So that's definitely been a major contributing factor to what is happening in the entire region. But then obviously from within Israel, we've had internally political instability for the past, let's say, 4 years. With the 5 elections that we had over a 3.5-year period during COVID and everything that was happening. So that definitely didn't project a very resilient picture to our enemies. And now just recently, in recent months, with the new government and the judicial reform, then that has just made things even worse. And the very severe and fierce internal social divide within Israel and within Israeli politics and society, which has, for the first time in Israel's history, also affected the military and affected the security branches and agencies which are there to protect Israel. Then Israel's enemies, I believe, have read that as a potential weakness. I personally don't think that it has come to that yet, but that's how they've read it, and that has just added more fuel to their fire, so to speak, and stoked their desire and their how they view Israel being now in a weak and vulnerable situation, and therefore now
Stefan, Stefan, within a minute and a half, 2 very quick questions. The first question is, with the prospect of Israel facing a war on multiple fronts, would this be caused by an Israeli airstrike on Iran's nuclear facilities to stop Iran from achieving a nuclear breakout and having nuclear weapons? Or will the Iranian regime carry out this attack at any moment, or will they wait for the Israelis? And the second one is, as Christians, lovers and supporters of Israel, how can we pray for the peace of Jerusalem at this very critical and dangerous time in Israel's history?
Yes, that's kind of the million-dollar question. I don't have a definite answer. I would assume that Iran would not attack Israel on its own, but that could definitely happen. But very possibly Israel would preempt with an attack because of the Iranian regime's pursuit of nuclear weapons, something that Israel will not allow to happen. There is still some time until it gets to that point that it could happen tomorrow, but I don't believe Israel will allow that to happen. So I would say the chances are more severe or higher that it would come from an Israeli preemptive attack and not from Iran actually reaching that type of capability and attacking Israel. So that's for the first question. And then the second question about how to pray, I believe God's will is going to be carried out one way or another. A lot of the things that we're talking about tie in with end time events that the Bible speaks about. Yet with that, I would encourage believers, Christians from around the world to be praying for wisdom for Israel's government and military leaders. I would advise to pray for confusion in the camp of the enemy, and for failure for their plans and the devices and whatever it is that they're trying to, their schemes and whatever it is that they're trying to bring about against Israel for protection of its borders. And what we're commanded to in the Bible is to pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Stefan, Stefan, thank you so much for joining us from Israel today. Thank you so much for your time. We'll be praying for you and your family, and thank you for what you do in not only being a pastor in Israel, but also serving bravely and courageously with the IDF reserves.
Thanks, Simon. Great to be with you.
Robin, it was great to have Stefan's perspective on the very precarious situation that Israel faces. Of course, we haven't really touched on very much, not only the kind of drone warfare that Israel faces, which is a new dynamics in a future war, but also what the role within the Palestinian Authority will actually play. We know, for example, that there are many young Palestinians living within the Palestinian Authority, particularly in Jenin, who have been sponsored by the Iranian regime, who are itching for a war and a fight with Israel, who have no memory or memory at all about the aftermath of the second the second Intifada back in 2000 to about 2003.
Yeah. And we also have the situation where the Palestinian Authority is losing its influence over its own people almost on a daily basis. So you've got the two things playing into each other. Iran feeding into the disgruntlement of these young hotheads, and them looking on and seeing the corruption that there is in their own leadership, and the dissatisfaction that that's breeding, and the wanting to lash out against Israel, again, fed by the Iranian regime.
But with about less than 3 minutes to go, could we see a situation where we see Israel's strategic situation very precarious as it was back in or I should say May of 1967, and the Lord turning this around for an absolute miracle? The situation looks bleak, but we know that God is sovereign. His hand is upon Israel. And he who touches Israel touches the apple of God's eye.
Yeah, and that's actually the unspoken factor in everything that we've talked about for this program. I mean, and Stefan has rightly, towards the end of the interview, drawn us back to that whole point, that we must not forget that behind all of these human machinations and this anger and hatred and desire to kill, to lash out, the God of Israel is working out his purpose.
Robin, thank you so much for joining me on Behind Headlines, and I want to thank you for watching this program at home. We just outlined the dangerous security scenarios that Israel is currently facing. We have an obligation and a duty to play our part by praying for Israel and the Jewish people, and pray that Israel would be protected and the plans of the enemy would be in confusion. So thank you for watching tonight's edition of Behind Headlines.